So let's just walk through the actual forms here and make sure that we're clear on them. So our active endings, as you remember, were me, ct, and the middle passive, they're my, sci, tai. If you think omicron before the me, it would be oh me, oh my. So when you're learning these verbs, maybe that's how you feel. Oh me, oh my. Okay, so me, ct, and my, sci, tai. The only difference between these two is the insertion of the alpha between these two letters. Men and te for we and y'all on the active primary, middle passive primary, methus they, sort of similar, a little bit different. And then we have nt for our true ending and ntai. Again, I'm just inserting an alpha here, and I've got my middle passive endings. So there's a lot of similarities and patternness to it. So let's read the forms, okay? First, luamai, which we could translate if we're doing this as truly passive meaning. How? If it's truly passive, it's present. So I am loosed, or I am being loosed. Okay. Lue. And what does that mean? You are loosed or being loosed. Luatai, everybody? So he, she, or it is loosed. Luamatha is we are being loosed. Luaste. Who's that? You or you all are being loosed or are loosed. And then finally, everybody, luantai is who? They are loosed. Okay? So remember, since this is present, middle passive, we actually have a choice as to how we translate some of these verbs because they actually are susceptible of being truly passive as well as middle. And if the verb is a transitive verb in English or in Greek for that matter, if it takes a direct object, then it can be made passive. It can be made truly passive. If it's intransitive, then it can't have a truly passive meaning. And I think we use the examples of to kill and to die, right? Did we look at those two verbs? We did? Yeah? To kill is transitive, and to die is intransitive. So can I make to kill passive? Yes. John was killed, or John is killed. Can I make to die passive? No, I can't say John is died. All right? So in order to be truly passive, a verb needs to be transitive in the active voice. Okay, both of these are active, but only one of them is transitive. Now, I did want to remind us on the second person singular form that what we have here is lu plus e plus psi. So what happens to this sigma between these two vowels? Yes, it drops into Sheol.
Why does the sigma drop again?
Yeah, this is a characteristic of intervocalic sigma, sigma between two vowels.
So anytime the sigma between two vowels drops?
Not any time, but we tend to see it on the outer margins of the verb form. So where the personal endings are, and then the connecting vowels, sigmas around those will tend to drop out. So when the sigma is gone, what are we going to have go on between the vowels that are left? They will contract. So epsilon and alpha, what do those do? Those create an eta. And then what happens to the iota? It will subscript under that eta. Okay? So that's where lue comes from. That is the only form that doesn't retain the true middle passive personal endings. So my, sci, tai, methus, they, and tai. Okay. Any questions about the forms?
Or why does that iota subscript?
Yeah, why does the iota subscript? One of the things that we learned about iotas is that when iotas come after a long vowel, they do like to subscript. All right? So that's what's happening here.
Does that actually what affects pronunciation?
It ends up being pronounced as if the iota is not there. So lue is how you'd pronounce it. It drops like an upsilon would?
Right? Like, I mean, even though you're writing down its subscript.
Oh, you mean like in those contractions?
But like the iota is gone though, isn't it?
Well, it is visible here, right?
I mean, yeah, you write it, but like the
Yes,
actual sound
but in terms of the pronunciation, it is not pronounced.
so
That is right.
why subscripted at all?
Yeah, good question. I'm not really sure.
In ancient Greek texts, did they subscript the iota?
You will find a lot of ancient texts where there aren't iota subscripts, even though you know they happen in the language. So they're not represented in a lot of places. So, yeah. But they're not pronounced. So the iota subscripts do not affect pronunciation.
I have a question.
Yes.
If so we were to have another word that does the same thing, where the sigma drops and then it is a contracting vowel.
Mm-hmm.
How would we? Because we would see the end result, right? How would we get to the point where we would know that it was second person singular?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what you're going to want to be looking for, at least for now, you're going to want to be looking for an eta with an iota subscript as indicative of that. It's the psi that has dropped the sigma and the alpha and iota have contracted. Yeah, it's not easy to start with this and to work backward guessing when you don't know Greek well.
Right.
It's like, oh yeah, clearly such and such came along and bumped into such and such, and this is
Unless
what the result was.
Word's form in its entirety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what I would recommend that you do is obviously you want to know the first form, luamai, as your sort of your basic form that's representative of the present middle passive indicative. I would recommend that since this is so unusual looking that you try to commit both of those to memory.
Okay.
So luamai lue. All right, luamai lue. Okay, great. Let's take a look real quickly at the rest of the items in the chapter. So look at 18.10. This is a quick discussion on how Greek translates the word by in passive constructions. Because in passive constructions, we can just say things like, John was killed. The dog was run over. Pardon all the morbid examples. What we're failing to do here is we are indicating who's been affected by the action, what we would describe as the patient. The subject of a passive verb is the patient. It's the one that is acted upon. But what we're not doing in those sentences that I just mentioned is we're not specifying who the agent is, who's performing the action that the subject undergoes. Now, how do I do that in English? Well, I use the prepositional phrase by such and such or so and so. So I could say something like, John was killed by the mafia. I hope none of you are connected with the mafia. But if you are, don't tell me. Okay. So John is the patient. He's the one who is affected by the action. And the mafia is the agent, the doer of this verbal action. When the subject is passive, or when the subject is the subject of a passive verb, the subject is not performing the killing. It's not performing the verbal action. Someone else is doing that. And I can choose to specify it with a prepositional phrase, by so-and-so, or I can choose to leave it unspecified. All right? Now, in Greek, if I want to specify the agent, I'm going to use hupa. You remember that preposition from your preposition chapter? It's going to be hupa plus the object of the preposition will have to be in a particular case. What case will the preposition hupa be in when it's specifying the agent in a passive construction? It's going to be in the genitive case. All right? Now, if you if you might remember, hupa can actually take objects in another case also. Hupa plus the accusative is what? Under. Hypochondriac, right? No, hyper. No, hypo. Hyper. What? Wait, which one is it? It's hypochondriac, right? Okay. And then hypodermic, under the skin. Goodness, I can't seem to remember my own prefixes here. Okay, so under, and hyper means above or over. So hyperactive is above active. Hypothyroid, right? So, all right, let's go back here. So hupa plus the genitive case will have a different meaning. We're going to translate that as by. Okay? So just to be aware that that's how you're going to see it in Greek. And Mounce gives you one example of that. We don't need to spend time going through it. We'll see some more examples of it also. Now, on page 152, Mounce introduces us to the concept of deponent verbs. And I mentioned the other day that deponent verbs are verbs, as Mounce describes them, verbs which have no active form, okay? They have no active form, but they are active in meaning. And I've also told you that many grammarians are jettisoning the concept and the language of verbs in Greek being deponent. What many would prefer to say is, look, it doesn't have an active form. It just has middle forms or passive forms. And we don't need to call it deponent. We just need to label it as a middle verb when we see it. One of the verbs that we are learning is erchomai. Erchomai. And erchomai means to go. All right? Or I go if it's first person singular. There is no form. Oops, don't want the he yet. There is no form that looks like this. Ercho. Okay? That means to go. If I say erchomai, I go, or I am going, that sure sounds like it's active in orientation, right? I'm the subject and I'm actually physically moving my legs or moving along somewhere. So that is active in its meaning, but there is no omega here. This is going to have the middle passive endings. And so when you get your vocab word, normally it'll have an omega. First person singular is typically the form with an omega. But sometimes you're going to see a verb whose form ends with my in that position. And that means that there is no active form for the present. It uses the middle passive endings all the time with that present stem. And so you're not going to try to give it any sort of a passive nuance here. Okay, in this case, erchomai means to go. Another verb that we're going to learn that doesn't have any active forms is paruamai. Okay, paruamai also is another form of I go. I proceed. Okay? Yes?
For erchomai, is it just context that would tell you whether it's to go or to come?
Yes. Oftentimes it's a matter of perspective with respect to where the speaker is and the person that you're talking about, right? Or some other point of orientation. We sort of instinctively know to do that in English too, don't we? Like if I call you and I'm thinking in terms of where you are, I would say, hey, Derek, I'm coming in just a few minutes, right? Because I'm going to be moving towards you. And so I'm thinking of that spatial direction from the perspective of you as the one who's being approached, right? And if my wife is standing next to me and says, where are you going? I would say, I'm going to Derek's place, right? Because now I'm thinking of that orientation of departure from her, you see. Okay. We don't often think about these things, do we?
Say, like, that's weird. That's very weird to
Yeah.
write it down like that.
Yeah, we never think about it, but we know how to use it.
Yeah.
Because we know it sounds weird, right? If my wife asked me, where are you going? I wouldn't say, I'm coming to Derek's house. Would I? So, yeah, it's interesting to think about these things. Okay, so we have looked at most of the forms here in the chapter. One other thing to discuss, and this is on page 153, is page 153. One thing we need to discuss is the matter of contract verbs. Because not only can we do contract verbs in the active, which is what we just covered in the last chapter, but we can see contract verbs in the middle passive form also. And guess what? This is not going to be too hard. You know your middle passive forms. And you know contract verbs will contract that contract vowel, and it's going to be fairly easy to parse these. Let's take agapao as an example. Agapao. What's my present stem for agapao? Agapa. Okay, so there we go. Agapa. What if I want to say, I'm smiling because I am loved. I am loved. And I want to create a passive verb here. Well, I take my present stem, agapa, and I add a connecting vowel, and then I add a personal ending. If I am the subject of I am loved, I'm going to use my, right? And if I'm using my, which connecting vowel do I use? Omicron. Because before what do I use an omicron connecting vowel? Mu or nu. All right? So agapa amen. Now, agapa amai. What's going to happen to the alpha omicron here? Yeah, they'll contract and become omega. Because omicrons and omegas win every battle except for the omicron, epsilon, and omicron, epsilon contraction. Okay, so it's agapomai with my little, or my big circumflex there. Now take a look at that. Looking at agapomai, can you tell me that that's a first person singular ending? Looking at the mai. Yeah, that's easy to identify, isn't it? Mai sai tai. Methus se tai. Okay, that's for singular. Can you tell me that that's middle passive? Yeah, because me or nothing is the first person singular active. My is the first person singular middle passive. So you could parse this as middle passive indicative, first singular, and then present. Right now, that's the only stem we know. But is this using the present stem? It is, except for one thing. The present stem has an alpha, and that contract vowel of the alpha has been obscured because of the contraction, hasn't it? But every other part of that present stem is present. Pardon the pun. Okay, so you could still parse this. Yes?
So the lexical form, though, would be active?
Yes, the lexical form is always the present active indicative first singular if it has an active form, right? Erkamai was that verb that we looked at over here. Its lexical form does not have an omega because it doesn't have an active form at all. It never uses an active form. So it has to use the middle passive form it has for its lexical form. All right. So let's just take another example here. Let's take poi eo. This is our epsilon contract. So there's our epsilon. And let's use the metha ending. Who's the subject when it's metha? We. Good. So that's first person plural. And I want to put an omicron there for my connecting vowel. So I have poi e, present stem, plus a and metha. Well, what's going to happen here? Epsilon and omicron will contract. And what do those two become when they meet? Omicron, upsilon. We'll fill up our space here. Will I have a circumflex here? Yes, I will. All right, so now I'm left with poiumatha, and that means we are made. Okay, poiao means to do or make. This is present, middle, passive, and we're going to give it the passive translation value because to make can be made passive because it is a transitive verb when it's active, to make something, direct object. Okay, so we are made. Poiumatha. Poiumatha. Question?
I noticed that just for the first person singular verbs, Mounce has them with different, he doesn't have the circumflex on them.
Oh, you're right. You know what? I just remembered. My rule about circumflex, pardon me, is that it can only go on the last two syllables. Okay? Circumflex can only go on the last two syllables. So if I accent that, that's going to have to be an acute accent. That's right. Thank you. Good. So poiumatha. Poiumatha. So say that with me. Agapomai, I am loved, and poiumatha, we are made. All right? Now, if I gave you poiumatha and said parse that, you could, because you know metha is first person plural and middle passive. And then you would look at the front part and say, what is a verb whose lexical form has poi in it? And clearly it would be poiao. That's the only verb you know that even looks similar to that. Okay? All right. Let's do one last one. Let's take to fill or fulfill. Play ra is my present stem. And let's use tai. I love saying that. You say that with me. Tai. All right. And what vowel do I have? What connecting vowel do I use before the new? Omicron. Well, I'm picking all the personal endings that use an omicron connecting vowel. All right. So the omicron will contract. They become what? Omicron upsilon. Okay, so play runtai. And here I should get my circumflex. How will we translate this? Tai is who? Third plural, so they. It's not active. Let's make it passive. Are filled. Okay, so they are filled. So here's the deal with translating passive verbs. How do we make a good English translation of a passive verb? If it's present passive, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to have our subject pronoun if there's no explicit subject. Then we're going to use a form of to be. And then we're going to use in English what's called the past participle. All right? So what is the past participle? The past participle in English is that principal part. All English verbs have basic forms called principal parts that are used to build all of the tenses of the English verbal system. It's the part that I use when I want to stick it in this little slot here. I have blanked. Okay? So what form of a verb do I stick there? Well, let's do a couple of these. How about the verb to come? Which form of come would I put here? I have come. I have come. How about to eat? Would we say I have ate? No, I have eaten. Good. To break. What's the past tense of break? It's broke. But if I want to say I have done that, I would say I have broken. Okay? So all of the forms that would go in this slot are the past participle, and it's the same form you're going to use for your passive verbs in English. Now, if my passive tense in Greek is the present tense, then I'm going to use the present of the form to be. All right? So let's take a look at play runtai, for example. what do I have here? My pronoun for the third person plural is they, right? So that's where my pronoun goes. Which form of to be am I using since it's the present passive? I'm using are, right? That's the present form. And then the past participle, filled, right? Like if I wanted to use the verb to fill in this type of a construction, I would say I have filled, you see? So I am filled. You are filled. He, she, or it, which form of to be do I use? Is. Okay? So make sure that the present tense form of to be that you're using matches your subject. You can't say he are filled.
Can you say that again? Your verb to be has to match
The subject, right? So if you think through all your pronouns, I, you, he, she, it, and if we're doing the verb to be in the present tense, it's I am, you are, he, she, it is. And then on the plural side, we are, you or y'all are, they are. It's are on the right. It's am, are, is on the left. Okay? Now, when I was growing up in Mississippi, sometimes we said we is. Did anybody else say we is growing up? Yeah. Well, let me just tell you that in Mississippi, we were frequently 50th in the United States, among the 50 states in terms of our educational ranking. But also, when I was growing up, the Clintons were in charge of Arkansas. And sometimes Arkansas beat us for 50th place. And I like to think that maybe the Clintons had something to do with that. But I digress. That's my political bias there. Okay. So anyhow, there you go. I did have to admit to my Bible study the other day at church on Sunday that we were talking about the verb to be, is. And I did admit that Bill Clinton does have a point when he says that sometimes it does matter what the word is. So, because he was asked, questions about this when he was having his affair, and he really parsed out the verb is and made it mean something that a lawyer could make it mean. But sometimes it's true. Like we were talking about how Jesus says, "This is my body." What does is mean there? Does it mean literally is? Does it mean equal sign is? Or can is be a representative notion? This represents my body. Well, we went through several texts in the Gospel of John where Jesus used I am statements, and what he says I am are not things that he literally is. He's not a literal door. He's not or a gate, right? So anyhow. Okay, moving along here. So those are examples of the passive forms of contract verbs, okay? So you'll recognize all the contractions because you've already seen them. They're just now going to come before middle passive endings instead of the active ones that you've already learned. Are there any other questions? All right. If not, let's take a moment and just read these Greek vocabulary words together, shall we? You ready? Oh, the master verb chart. I do want you memorizing the master verb chart. These will be on your quizzes going forward. So right now we've learned the present active and now the present middle passive. This column that says aug redupe, you don't know what that means yet. It's okay. Leave it blank. The stem you're using is the present stem for both. There are no tense form or tense formatives. We will learn that in chapter 19. You only have two connecting vowels, so put them both in for both rows. And the endings are almost the same. They're both primary because we're dealing with present tense. but the present active uses the primary active endings. Present middle passive uses the primary middle passive endings. And then remember and memorize these two forms that are what he calls the first person singular paradigm form, luo and luomai. All right?
What does he mean under the personal endings when he says primary active and primary active?
So what he's saying here is that we're going to keep building our chart. So when we get to other tenses, they're going to use different sets of endings. So let me show you. Okay, so this is the master personal ending chart. And right now, the two left column, the two boxes in the left column are the ones we've learned. Primary tenses, both of these are the endings for primary tenses. The top one is for active, and the bottom one is for middle passive tenses.
So those verbs in the secondary tenses, are those also present active verbs?
No, the secondary tenses are going to be the ones that use this thing called the augment that we haven't learned about yet in this chart. And if it uses an augment, it will use the right side secondary tense personal endings. And there's active ones and there's middle passive ones as well. They're similar, slightly different. We use them for different tenses.
So how do you translate those?
So what we have here are what's called the imperfect. And this would be translated past time, but continuous. So I was loosing, you were loosing, he, she, it was loosing. As opposed to I am loosing, you are loosing, he, she, it is loosing. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's read the vocab words on page 154. Repeat after me. Apokrinomai. Apokrinomai means I answer or to answer. And I want you to notice that this is the lexical form, apokrinomai. It does not end with an omega. So it's not apokrino, but apokrinomai. So Mounce would call this verb what? Deponent. It doesn't have an active form. So it's going to be using the middle passive forms in the present. You're going to translate that as I answer, not I am answered. Okay? It's I answer. All right, next we have day. Day. So day is it is necessary. So the subject is an impersonal third person subject. It is necessary that I go to such and such a place. And it's used in expressions where Jesus says it is necessary for the Son of Man to go to Jerusalem, to be betrayed, and so forth. Next, we have dunamai. Dunamai. So this also has a my ending, even though in most forms, omega would be the lexical form's ending. All right, so this has no active form. I am able, or I am powerful. Now take a look at the vowel before the my, psi, tai in that paradigm. Did you notice that there is no connecting vowel here? So this particular verb doesn't use an omicron epsilon connecting vowel. All right, it just tacks that ending right on to the alpha stem. Next, erchamai. Erchamai, I come or go. Nukes. Nukes sounds like bombs, doesn't it? This is the word night. Look at the form. You actually saw this back in chapter 10 when we did, third declension forms. All right, this is a third declension noun whose stem ends with a consonant, nuked. It ends with a kappa, then a tau. And you know that nuked is the stem because you can find the genitive form that's given with the lexical form, and you drop the genitive case ending, you're left with the stem. All right? So nuktas, of night. Next, hostis, hatis, hati. So whoever, whichever, whatever. This is a combination or a compound of the relative pronoun has, he, ha, and the indefinite pronoun tis and ti. Mashed together. Remember, tis and ti have their own case endings. has, he, and ha, have their own case endings, and they inflect for them together. Okay? So, really, really interesting. Next, we have pareuamai. Pareuamai is I go, proceed, or live. Sunago, I gather together or invite. You can imagine where synagogue comes from, right? Sunagoge. And tapas is a noun, place or location. Think topography, topographical map. And then hos, as, like, when, that, how, and about. So lots of little meanings for this little particle. And I think that's the last one.